Good afternoon. I've been wanting to do a video on the state of South African education for a really long time, for many years. If you go to my YouTube channel called Penuel, even if you go to my Facebook page, Penuel the Black Pen, you'll see that I've got a lot of different videos speaking about education, speaking about alternatives to the current education system we have, and even speak about home education, you know. I was playing touch rugby in Bryanston with a couple of mates, and this conversation came up when we started speaking about where are people sending their kids to school. And a big part of the conversation was around the cost of education. Kids are expensive. This is how much school fees are. And it's been bugging me for years that there's so much ignorance around what is regarded as average school fees. What are high school fees, you know? And I decided last week to finally do this video. I figured it would be a long video. I thought it would maybe be a 2-hour video where I'm literally unpacking and going through the different provinces and going through some of the top schools, what we consider top schools, discussing public and private education. Then today I started doing the research, and I think an hour and a half in, my head was spinning. For many reasons. Number one, I was reading a lot of articles. Number two, I was crunching a lot of data and a lot of numbers. Number three, I was also pretty shocked at how many schools I know and how many people I know from different schools. So what I've decided to do instead, I'm going to do a series, hopefully throughout the whole of this week. Hopefully on Facebook Live, I think, and then I'll transfer it to my YouTube channel, God Penuel, and maybe just attack different aspects of the education system in this country. They do say that to eat an elephant, you have to take one bite at a time, and to move a mountain, you move it one rock at a time. The one thing I want to emphasize, let me start here. I was a very good student at school. I was an A student. I used to get top marks. I used to be in the top 5, top 10 in the grade. I was brilliant. Passed with distinction in matric. I used to get your 80s, 90s, etc. School came easily to me. That had nothing to do with me per se. I think it had a lot to do with my genes. I could sit in class, not really study much after class, and then come out and come up with 80%. Whereas other kids would have to work really, really hard just to get a 70, or work really, really hard just to get an 8. School came easily to me. I had a great time in school. Academically, in terms of culture, I sang in various school choirs. I was in the school band. I did debating and sports. I did athletics, I did cross country, and I played rugby, which I'm still very passionate about today. But I've got very, very huge issues with the schooling system in general, not just in South Africa. And a lot of people make this mistake when we have these conversations of discussing schooling as education. I have issues with schooling. I have no issues with education. I absolutely am passionate about education. But a lot of people don't understand that education is not confined in a classroom with a qualified teacher. Education is any valuable knowledge you can get from Istago, a drunkard in the street. It can be from your uncle, it can be from your parents. It can, if you're an old person, education can come from a 5-year-old child. You can get education anywhere, on TV, on your phone, in a newspaper, in a book, anywhere that you find knowledge and information that can add value to your life. That is almost a school. Any person is a potential teacher. Any space is a potential classroom. I love education very much. South Africa needs to move beyond the mental confines of schooling and move into broader education. Especially if you look at this country that we're living in, and if you look at our 40% unemployment, our 74% youth unemployment. If you look at the quality of our schools, if you look at how poor people are, if you look at people that are hungry, if you look at crime levels, clearly schooling is not doing it. And clearly this current model we have, which is just capitalism, the only way to make it in life is to go to school, go to varsity, get a job, get money, and then live. It's not working. And we need alternatives. And if your mind is confined like a prisoner in this whole schooling thing, where the only way, I hear so many people say it, celebrities, politicians, other educated people, they say, go to school. They're like, school is the key. There are so many, we've got Jacob Zuma. Before he finished his schooling and got his tertiary qualifications with Julius Malema. We've got so many dropouts and other brilliant people. That should highlight to you that school does not have a monopoly on information and education. Today we have the internet. I'm here coming to school you. You're not paying school fees. You're not in a classroom. You're here on the internet, on Facebook, where you're busy laughing at fat jokes and busy perving over girls' bums. You're here to learn. So we need to open our minds outside of just seeing schooling as the tool and look broad at education. Where can I get the best education from? And then start looking into different systems of living for ourselves as a people. I'm getting carried away. For today's session in unpacking South African schools, I want to read an article from the Mail and Guardian, which was published on the 3rd of October, 2021, last year, written by Matthew Stern. Really great piece. Like I said, when I was crunching the data today, I ended up being dizzy. This was a great article I found, and I was like, you know what? I wanted to take bits and pieces of this article, but I was like, it is so damn good. I want to read the whole damn thing to you guys. Before I read it, let's start on Wikipedia. So just a hack for those of you who might be in tertiary. I don't know if it's still the same. When I was in university at Rhodes University and even at the University of Johannesburg, a lot of our lecturers used to say, please don't reference Wikipedia. Please don't reference Wikipedia. It is not an academic source. If you go on Wikipedia, for those of you that do research, and then you go all the way to the bottom, you'll find what's called references. If you read through Wikipedia, there's various information they give you. And at the end of like various sentences, there's numbers there. If you click on those numbers, they send you to a specific reference, which then send you to a certain website. So if ever you're doing an essay for varsity or anywhere else that needs academic referencing, go to Wikipedia, reference whatever you, or quote whatever you find there, click on that link and then rather go reference the article that is used in Wikipedia. So let's start here. Education in South Africa on Wikipedia. Education in South Africa is governed by two national departments, namely the Department of Basic Education, the DBE, which is responsible for primary and secondary schools, and the Department of Higher Education and Training, DHET, which is responsible for tertiary education and vocational training. Prior to 2009, both departments were represented in a single Department of Education. The DBE department deals with public schools, private schools, also referred to by the department as independent schools, early childhood development, which is ECD, centers, and special needs schools. The public schools and private schools are collectively known as ordinary schools, which are roughly 97% of schools in South Africa. The DHET department deals with further education and training, FET colleges, now known as Technical and Vocational Education and Training, TVET, TVET colleges. Adult Basic Education and Training, ABET or ABET centers, and Higher Education, HE institutions. The 9 provinces of South Africa also have their own education departments that are responsible for implementing the policies of the national department and dealing with the local issues. In 2010, the basic education system comprised 12,644,208 learners, 30,586 schools, and 439,394 teachers. Don't look at me, I'm not Msholozi, I will not mess up the numbers. In 2009, the higher education and training system comprised 837,779 students in higher education institutions, 420,475 students in state-controlled FET institutions, and 297,900 in state-controlled ABET centers. Njoba ngintsheliile inamba lezi zizokudriver ding dong DZ. In 2013, the South African government spent 21% of the national budget on education. Some 10% of the education budget is for higher education. For people that don't know, South Africa's budget sits at, I'll tell you 2 years ago, if not a year ago, our state budget was at about 1.9 trillion rand. So that's about 2 trillion. 20% of that is for education, which is one of the highest budgets in the world on a relative basis. 20% of 2 trillion would be 400 billion, if I'm correct. 400 billion rand is set aside for education. So people that think that our government doesn't invest in education are actually lying. I want to read one more piece here before I go to the article. A lot of the people that are knowledgeable about the education system speak about quintile schools. And a lot of people don't really know what that means. The size, let me go a paragraph before that. The size of the grant paid by government to schools is determined largely by the poverty level of the neighborhood in which the school is situated, as well as unemployment rate and the general education rate of the population in that neighborhood. Consequently, schools in more affluent areas must raise more money from other sources to maintain the same standard of education. But schools from affluent areas often have so much more additional income that their standard of education is much higher than that of less affluent schools anyways. What does this mean in basic English? It means our government gives more money to schools in poor areas than in rich areas. The people that believe that schools in white, rich suburbs get more money from government or more support, that is fake news and that's false. This is the paragraph I wanted to read. The size of the government grant per child depends on the quintile of the school. In 2009, schools in quintile 1 is the poorest, and quintile 2 received 807 rand and 740 rand per child per year, respectively. And as schools in quintile 4 and quintile 5, which is the richest, they received 404 rand and 134 rand per child per year. So in the poorest school or the poorest neighborhood in this country, government budgets 807 rand per child per year. And in the richest neighborhoods, government budgets 134 rand per child per year. Schools in quintile 1 to 3 may apply for classification as a no-fee school. 5% of all schools are quintile 5 schools. So 5% of our schools are in the rich neighborhoods. And 15% of all schools are in quintile 4. So quintile 4 and 5, which are at the top, accounts for about 20% of the schools. 80% of them are at the bottom. I don't want to go into too much detail because I want to uncover some of this stuff as the week goes on. But I want to highlight 67% of the schools in this country are no-fee schools, which means the parent don't pay school fees. 67%, which means only 33% of schools at the top pay school fees. Let me get back to my article. Mail and Guardian, The True State of South Africa's Schools. Matthew Stern, the 3rd of October, 2021. Let me put on my performance voice for the beginning. We wanted to build a school. That was the dream we tossed around in our more ambitious moments, drunk on possibility from the small steps we'd taken with our education non-profit. We'd end every planning session by boldly stating, and then we build a school. It became a kind of war cry for our crowd-funded bursary program. But then we began to wonder if building a school actually was the best use of our efforts. And if not, what should we be focusing on instead? Yes, come on, thank education. Inspired by the philosophy of William McCaskill, who champions the concept of effective altruism, we tried to forget our preconceptions of what we thought was needed and looked at the whole system clearly, from creche to job market. Our mantra became, first understand what is before dreaming of what can be. I want to read a certain line again. We tried to forget our preconceptions of what we thought was needed and looked at the system, at the whole system clearly. Elon Musk and some of the other guys, these are principles they took from the inventors of back then. They speak about first principles, and I've spoken about it in one of my videos. That sometimes when you're trying to solve a problem, don't try and think, oh, this is what people need. Take a step back and be like, you know what, put that aside and try and focus on first principles, on what exactly is the issue here. Yes, these guys wanted to build a school, but is that the best use of what they wanted to do? Or is there a smarter way? And if you go back to what I said before, education does not need to be confined to a classroom and to a qualified teacher. Immersing ourselves in the education space as outsiders, we are a collection of friends, entrepreneurs, chefs, lawyers, accountants, winemakers, journalists, and doctors, has been fascinating and sobering. I began by emailing 50 leading education experts, such as John Folmunk, Nick Spalls, and Nick Taylor, and asked them what they thought were the biggest issues. I read the papers they sent us, and the papers mentioned in the footnotes, and then read the papers mentioned in the footnotes of those papers. I read the Department of Basic Education's Action Plan to 2024, listened to podcasts such as the Answer Series and Education Matters in South Africa, and contacted a wide range of other NGOs. What did I find? Well, it's complicated. The scope is enormous. The education system is our biggest system in the country. Giles Gillett, the chief executive of New Leaders Foundation, said in a recent interview. South Africa has nearly 26,000 schools, 400,000 teachers, and close to 13 million learners. Everyone's been to school, so they all have an opinion around how to fix education. But the logistics behind it are enormous. South Africa has one of the most unequal school systems in the world. The gap in test scores between the top 20% and the rest is wider than in almost every other country. On the one side, there are functional, wealthy schools. On the other, which 85% of our students attend, are poorly funded, dysfunctional schools. The state of the worst schools is certainly cause for concern. According to the Department of Education's 2018 statistics, out of 23,471 public schools, 20,071 have no laboratory, 18,019 have no library, while 16,897 have no internet, 239 have no electricity, and 37 have no sanitation facilities at all. What's interesting to note, however, is that schools don't fail or thrive based on their resources. I'll read that again. What's interesting to note, however, is that schools don't fail or thrive based on their resources, on whether they're rich or poor. It's the culture that's more important. Documentary filmmaker Molly Blank, who traveled the country in search of the best performing schools, said, having an inspirational figure at the head of the school will create a community of learning and hold teachers accountable. They understand the power of education to change lives. Partners for Possibility has also realized this and seeks to empower school principals from under-resourced schools by partnering them with business leaders. Many of you may know there are many township schools around the country that have excellent matric results. 100% pass rate, the students are disciplined, they get into tertiary, they become doctors, lawyers, accountants, engineers, all because at the top, they have a strong principal, they have a strong HODs, they have a strong staff. Sometimes if they like, they have parents that are involved and they push, even though they don't have the money and the resources. Lack of literacy. 78%, almost 80% of grade 4 learners cannot read for meaning. This statistic is mentioned almost everywhere when it comes to the state of our education. It means that 4 out of 5 10-year-old children cannot understand what they are reading. In Limpopo, this is as high as 91%. In the Eastern Cape, it's 85%. It's in this early stage that many learners get left behind. I'm going to stop there for a moment. is an Indian chap in America who built a website called the Khan Academy, who started off by creating YouTube videos for his nephews and nieces to teach them maths and I think science. So many other people enjoyed what he was doing so much, they suggested that he create an online school. Funded by Bill Gates and a couple of other billionaires and guys from Silicon Valley. Today we have the Khan Academy. You can go check it out on Google. It's free. It has so many nice lessons on how to learn. This gentleman goes and he gives a TED talk on mastery, which you can find on YouTube. And he talks about the fact that the schooling system doesn't work hard to cement the basics. Everything is based on age, grade, and that's it. You'll find that a child has got gaps in their learning. So from grade 1, they understood 1 plus 1 is 2, but maybe they didn't understand 2 plus 2 is 4. And then just from there, because they got 60%, 70%, but there's a gap of 30 to 40%, we move them to the next grade with that gap. And you might find that that gap is where the child lags. And if your child keeps getting 60% in every grade, there's gaps of learning and it compounds later on. Whereas if you just spent enough time getting your child to perfect this one thing, this foundation, even if it takes 5 years, everything else becomes easier. I'm going to carry on reading. I couldn't understand this until I realized they are all being tested in English, which only 8% of learners in the country have as a home language. Imagine you grow up speaking English, you go to school, you start learning to read and write, and then in grade 4, start having to learn Invenda, which your parents don't speak, so they can't help you either. You'd have to be a genius to get by. I'm going to twist around what they're trying to say. Imagine you grow up speaking another language that is not English. You go to school, you start learning to read and write, and then in grade 4, you start having to learn in English for the first time in your life, which your parents don't speak or don't understand well, so they can't help you with your English. You'd have to be a genius to get by. If this isn't mind-blowing for a lot of people, I don't know what is. Being chucked into a foreign space of a language that is barely grasped at home and expected to excel, when this language is only a language of 8% home language speakers. The Eastern Cape Education Department is pioneering mother tongue-based learning in the higher grades, which is encouraging. And a not-for-profit organization called Funda Wande is experimenting with different teacher training approaches. Importantly, their materials and training are created in the languages the children speak. I've got many issues with the idea of introducing indigenous languages in this country. I understand the beauty of it. We have got 11 official languages. Rainbow Nation. But realistically speaking, in the world out there, in the economy, in the South African economy at least, it's still an English Afrikaans economy. So if you're teaching a child in isiXhosa from grade 1 to matric, if you're teaching a child in isiZulu from grade 1 to matric, you have to ask, have we built the industries and the economy to absorb them in the same way that an Afrikaans child can learn Afrikaans from grade 1 to matric and go work in the economy comfortably speaking only Afrikaans? But that's a conversation for another day. The quality of an education system cannot exceed the quality of its teachers. So the task is clear. We need to improve the quality of our teachers. There are two ways to achieve this: in-service teacher training and improving the actual university courses, what is known as initial teacher education. In the 1990s, teaching colleges in South Africa closed down. A few experts have suggested this derailed the system, while others aren't so sure. Whatever the case, it's clear that teachers need to be better prepared. In the 1990s, this was after apartheid and when we became a democracy, teaching colleges in South Africa closed down. Opportunities after school. Then there's the issue of school leavers. About 1 million South Africans write matric exams every year. 1 million. About 150,000 pass at a level that is acceptable to universities. 15% of matrics who write every year qualify for university entrance. But then again, there's only space for 70,000, which is less than half of the 150,000 as well. What becomes of all the school leavers who don't go to university? The Department of Education understands we need a mind shift. According to their action plan, while university studies are obviously a noble and important pursuit, alternatives have not received the focus they deserve in schools. In particular, vocational training options within schools and beyond basic education have not been sufficiently available, and when available, were undervalued by many teachers and parents. You guys look down on some of these vocational training colleges. Everyone wants to be a university, even though you don't qualify. And unfortunately, from when you're young to when you're in secondary school, when you speak to your parents, when you speak to your mates, everyone dreams of university. But the reality, as I said, only 15% of kids actually qualify every year. 85% don't qualify for university. And we're trying to squeeze all these kids into the space that doesn't accommodate them. This is a pressing issue. Youth unemployment is staggeringly high, while there's also a skills shortage in many sectors. We need to find a way to address both those issues simultaneously. As Rebecca Davis put it in her podcast, Don't Shoot the Messenger, principals and teachers need to get students to believe deeply that a life awaits them beyond school. I haven't even touched on the undue influence of the unions, government limitations, and the shortcomings within early childhood development, or that poverty, crime, and other social issues create a complex environment that makes it difficult for many teachers to do their job. Yet there are reasons to forge on, most clearly that there's simply no other option. That is not true. There are definitely other options. We speak, of course, this is me now, I'm not reading. We speak, of course, about this colonial education that has been enforced on us so that I'm speaking English today and angikhulumisa ngesiZulu esasekhaya. Like I said, capitalism can't be the be-all and end-all of the world. We've seen how it is destructive in its nature. Capitalists want to make profit by any means necessary, Malcolm X. So they make sure that they hire the smallest staff complement. They automate where they can. They outsource to Asia where labor is much cheaper because they want to maximize profit. And then they pay the least amount of tax if they're not dodging tax, which is meant to serve the rest of the population. That's capitalism. In the same way, this schooling system cannot be the be-all and end-all of a successful life. I say this regularly. Our forefathers 5 to 8 generations ago didn't go to school. They didn't speak English. But they were not what we classify as poor. They were not what we classify as hungry. They were able to, on their land, before they were shifted off by the apartheid government, they were able to grow their own food. They didn't go to an agricultural college for that. They didn't study agricultural notes and write tests and exams and go to a nice college somewhere and get NSFAS funding. They taught each other. They taught each other how to work the land. They taught each other how to build structures that are homes. Our mothers, our aunts, our grandmothers learned how to deliver babies without being gynecologists, without being qualified midwives. And we have lost these soft skills because we are not parenting initially. We're not spending time with our kids. And we've literally just narrowed ourselves to education can only be found in the classroom. And that is very, very incorrect. We need to change it. School cannot be the be-all and end-all of life. One of the topics maybe I'll uncover during the week is the drop-out rate. There's a term for it. I think it's contrition. There's a fancy English term for the number of kids that start grade 1 and finish matric and the drop-off rate at each grade. Because school is not for everyone. Just like we saw, university can only, or rather 15% of kids qualify for university. But even of that 15%, less than half of them actually have space. Now we have to look at FET colleges and other spaces. Do they have space as well? Then we have to take it back to connection. Are kids actually passing at school? Or should they be looking into doing something else as early as primary school level? Let me finish this article before Facebook kicks my behind. Reaching our potential. There are some encouraging signs. Firstly, South Africa invests a considerable amount of our GDP in education. as it has since the end of apartheid. In 2019, 5 billion rand was spent on corporate social responsibility efforts directed at education. Almost everybody realizes how important quality education is for our future. We're just not getting it right yet. I've come to see how many passionate South Africans are committed to changing the narrative. Organizations like JET, Zero Dropout Campaign, Equal Education, Funda Wande, Spirit Foundation, Nali Bali, Edi Fundi, and the National Education Collaboration Trust are reasons to feel good. We should remember that every day, teachers do their best with limited resources, and a number of inspirational principals continue their battles to transform their schools. Advances in tech are showing potential, with online learning promising new paths for success, although how that will benefit dysfunctional schools and disadvantaged learners remains to be seen. Obviously, our schools don't have internet and Wi-Fi. A lot of kids don't have tablets and phones and all these fancy gadgets, and a lot of them aren't even literate enough, or their parents literate to use a phone in an advanced manner. And more learners are in school than ever before. That, broadly speaking, is how things currently stand. So what are our dreams of what could be? On our wish list would be for the Department of Education to ensure school facilities and infrastructure up to scratch. The unions to put the interests of the students first. Schools find a way to develop strong principals. Principals as in the head of the school, the principal. Learners get a proper grasp of their home languages before moving on to English, and learners pursue new avenues of progression from high school to workforce. I'd argue not just to workforce, we can't just be breeding employees, but people that are contributing value in society to themselves. If you can feed yourself and house yourself, then you can consider giving to the greater economy and making money and those things. We need to focus on learning the skills to do for self. This is much easier said than done, I know. But just because it appears difficult doesn't mean it can't be done or shouldn't be attempted. If we can overcome the obstacles of our own design and learn to pull in the same direction, we might be surprised just how far we can go. We might have a chance to reach our potential. This is the first installment of me unpacking South African schools. As the week goes by, I'm going to be going into the most expensive schools in the country, both public and private. I'm going to be contrasting public and private schooling, specifically speaking about CAPS, which is the public schooling curriculum, versus IEB, which is the private independent schooling curriculum. I want to speak about money. I want to speak about how few schools are actually expensive, because a lot of parents don't actually realize. I want to speak about the poorer schools and some of their struggles and some of the alternative ways we should be educating our kids in poorer areas. And then I'll just be unpacking a lot of the schools I know, a lot of the kids I've met from these schools, and then looking beyond what is the school actually meant to be doing. Is it merely about academics, passing matric, getting exemption? Or is there more? Can your child become a sports star from the schooling platform? If not the schooling platform, are we looking for spaces outside of the school facilities for sports, for culture, for music? Churches have done a lot in that regard in upskilling kids in public speaking, learning how to play instruments, learning how to sing. When you look at Joya Celebration and other examples like them. There's a lot to unpack. Like I said, I thought I'd be able to do it in one sitting in 2 hours, but I looked at the data. I've been crunching a lot of data. I've been looking at the notes. I've noted a lot of things down, and I'm hoping that I'll try and segment some of this stuff and unpack it to you as best as I can. A lot of us have children. Our children are our future. If you want to know the future of any nation, look at the quality of their children, the quality of education. Look at the investment that we're putting into our kids. We want our kids not only to be adequate for this country. We don't want them to just do well and get jobs, but we want them to actually drive the future of the world. Not become Silicon Valley, not become China, but become whatever the world will aspire to in the future, which may have to do with dismantling capitalism, getting our South African kids to maybe be the first kids to go to Mars, if that's what it takes, dismantling money, getting our kids to reconfigure religion, reconfigure language. Is English the best language? Does it help us understand maths better? Or can we actually have kids that are creating new languages, creating new clothing types, new ways of interacting and engaging, and taking science fiction and putting it into real life and borrowing from the past, from our ancestors who had great ways of living with nature, just like in the movie Avatar by James Cameron, and seeing how we can have a greater future for ourselves, for our kids, and for future generations. Penuel the Black Pen. Hope you'll have a great Monday, and I'll chat to you guys soon. Cheers.